Today's theme is define over reflect. So we're going to be exploring both through this discussion and for the rest of the day what creativity's role is in culture. Is it our role to define culture, or should we as creatives be reflecting and commenting on what is happening in the world? So we're joined today by the Yarza twins, Eva and Marta, which means that Craig, you're outnumbered 2 on 1, I'm afraid. So Eva and Marta are the co-founders of the boutique studio, the Yarza twins, and they're going to be taking the side of define. And then we have Craig Oldham, who is the founder of the creative studio, the office of Craig Oldham, who is going to be talking on the side of reflect. So Eva and Marta, I'm going to hand over to you guys to get us started. Do take it away.
So, should the commercial creative industry be innovating and defining culture? We are on this discussion on the side of define. So shall we define what is going to happen and then it happens? Or shall this thing happens and then we reflect it? That's the discussion, right? So our answer is yes and no. Yeah, so when we speak about normal times, how important has been innovation? It's been very important. We cannot deny that you can innovate the future, like brand, as a brand makes like innovation designs that influenced after Apple, or if you speak about branding for the Olympic Games, the Lance Women made such an innovation design of Mexico based in the traditional Mayan kind of writing and stuff. So it was really good as well. Caroline Davidson created the swoosh for Nike,
which is inspired by the Greek god Nike.
Then is the Rolling Stones logo. These are all very iconic logos. All of us know they created like a beginning and end in the creative industry. They've been iconic. People have copied them. It's been like really great. This is like you can explain this one, Marta.
So this is Amsterdam that, okay, sorry, the screen is a bit delayed. What we see here is the Osborne bull. We want to tell you how a design is the opposite movement, how a design became culture. So in Spain in the 60s, 50s, 70s, also in the UK and all over Europe, and I'm sure around other countries, there were a lot of advertisements in the highways when you were driving. But because of these advertisements distract the drivers, there were a lot of accidents, so they were all forbidden. But there was this advertisement that we see in the screen, is for an alcoholic brand called Osborne. And it's so beautiful that there was a campaign to, when they remove all the advertisements from the road, to maintain some of these ones. The Osborne bull is how it's called. And this way, when you're driving the highway in Spain, sometimes you see these bulls around. And the fact is that the bull is like something very traditional in Spain, in many parties and things. And it somehow became an icon of this bull. Now you can see a lot of merchandising in Spain wearing this icon made by Manolo Prieto, and it's part of the culture. So this that started as a simple advertisement in the road, which is very beautiful, became an icon and became the culture.
Yes, but in these days, we cannot forget how innovation is brought in actual social change. We are in big social changes movements now, and we think we have to reflect on that as well, not just on beauty. So, for example, in the 80s, there were a lot of kind of designers who took things that were underground and they made it obvious in the face, like the Colors magazines. So to speak about how it's important to do social change through the elites, so they kind of spoke about imprisoner of Black people, for example. That's in the 80s. This is more modern, I think. It's about how boobs are like censored in Instagram. This is about gay and interracial, like love, AIDS. They were really big speakers of AIDS when people didn't really speak about it publicly. United Colors of Benettons in the 90s, they were created by the same creatives of the Colors magazine, and they made really impactful advertisements that no one had done before. And we think those are really good examples of how you can, by design, make a social change. As well, the unhate advertisements. And this one more locally in England. Also the Jean Julien sign of Paris when it was the Charlie Hebdo bombing or shooting, and he kind of made an icon for Paris. So there's been diversity in the creative industry. In this case, it's models that wouldn't have been accepted in that industry before. It's been more and more welcome, which is great. People are trying to make a change. This is a Gucci advertisement on what is beauty, right? Or what is a beautiful smile. But what we see in all these things, people are really speaking about diversity, making it happen.
Yeah, feminism, diversity, and to give everybody the same opportunities. But yes, what is happening in reality?
Yeah, that creative directors, CEOs, founders, and senior roles are mostly white males. And that's what these movements need to change, and what design cannot reflect. A brand can show diversity in the models and their campaigns, but unless they do a really deep change in which the senior roles become minority people or even women, this is not gonna be real, it's gonna be hypocritical. So many brands have put black squares and then they've been attacked by ex-workers who have been discriminated. And this is something we need to reflect, because brands are made out of people. That change should be made not from design, but it needs to be socially as well. For example, in the UK, only 1% of the agencies are founded by women, which is ridiculous. And if we look for statistics of founded by people of color and minorities, we couldn't find even statistics, but we suppose it's even less. So these are the things that need to change. So when we speak about the Black Lives Matter movement in social media, it wasn't about graphic designers creating designs for this movement. It was more about silencing ourselves and giving the space for Black people and minorities to have their voice on social media, to see their feeds and kind of see their movement. It wasn't about promoting your new poster or your new typography or your new illustration. It was trying to put black squares, not like a poster. And we think that's really what this is about. So it's not just about innovation through a message, but also through the behavior behind and the mind. When you think about the Me Too movement, no one remembers a poster. We remember a hashtag, and it's not written in Helvetica, it's not written in Comic Sans or another typography. It's more about the message, not the graphic design. So will you be part of the change and make a difference? Yeah, so we hope this replies to our point of view on this topic.
Amazing. Thank you, Eva and Marta. Some really interesting points there, sort of looking at how we can define culture, but also how we need to be reflecting internally as well. Thank you. Craig, I'm going to hand straight over to you, please.
Cheers, Alistair. Okay. So I guess, but before I start getting, sorry, somebody's just signed into my Zoom account, so I got an alert there. I thought I was going to get booted off, but it's fine. We're all right. I guess before I start wading into my sort of subject, I get some first things off is that I believe that design is a sort of an intellectual discipline. I don't believe it's a visual one. I think a lot of people get misled by the fact that they think, oh, it's about, you know, colours, typography, shape, image, all that kind of stuff. And actually it's not. It's about what you think about. And I think a lot of designers, or particularly what I would call, you know, decent designers or good designers, you know, they think before they do anything else. And in that whole kind of process, that whole long process, if you know, think about it, it's more like a TV show. There's a tiny little ad break before the last bit, before it all finishes, where you might do some visual elements, where you might move something around. Before that, you're thinking, you're analysing, you're critiquing, you're talking, you're thinking some more, you're interrogating. All of that stuff happens in the head. And designers, for me, are about sort of, you know, solving problems, you know, finding new ways to do things, finding common ground, and doing that as a sort of a connecting device really between, I guess, a brand and an audience, or a message and an audience. And it's all about communicating. So that, first of all, and also I think design is a means and not an end. I think if you just designing for design's sake, you're kind of fucked. There's nothing good is going to come out if nothing good is coming in. If you don't have a diverse kind of range of sources coming in that are from other disciplines, that are from other kind of areas, all completely altogether, not just creative, then your design is going to be poorer. But you use design to do things. It is not just you don't use design just to design yourself or to just design things. Again, as I said, I think you're fucked if that's your approach, because what's the point, you know? And I guess a way to sort of articulate that, much like what sort of Marta and Eva just said, really is like, it's not going to change anything. You know, Obama, for example, when he got elected, yeah, there was an amazing poster that was made for him by Shepard Fairey. It was beautiful and simple, but he didn't just get elected because of that. There was this whole swell of other things happening, and that poster was just a part of it. A necessary part, maybe you could argue a case for that, you know, a vital part, whatever, but it played a role. It wasn't the whole thing. If Obama wasn't doing what he was doing and nobody knew him and suddenly this post came out, he wouldn't just been fucking president the next day. It don't work like that. And so you have to use design as a means to solve problems and not as an end. So I guess just, oh, for fuck's sake. There we go. We're 8 grand at me with technology. We were on about this before we got on, how fucking useless I am. But yeah, I guess because I'm chiming in about all my stuff, all my opinions, I guess it's only fair to back it up. This is a sort of poster slash, I don't know what, campaign, I guess, that's just happened recently to do with the coronavirus and COVID-19. I was asked to just create a nice message. That was literally what I was asked, create a nice message to sort of, this company, Jack Arts, were putting up posters all over the cities across the country because their business was fucked, basically, because nobody was buying advertising space, so they wanted to put positive messages out there. And I heard the words of the Home Secretary ringing in my ear about, you know, not even in February this year, so not even weeks before all this kicked off, she was describing people who earned less than 25 grand a year as unskilled and low skilled, and fucking, you know, pretty much saying they were a pull on society. And then, yeah, not 2 weeks later, all of those people that she described as low skilled and unskilled suddenly became pretty apparent how vital they are and how interconnected all of our jobs are, no matter, you know, whether we clean or deliver or care for this country, we're an important part of it. So it was a really simple, quick thing. I wrote the line and then set that in, you know, a selection of these workers that earn £25,000 or less that are suddenly now key workers, and decided to use that as a message of positivity. So, you know, how it looks is determined by what it's trying to do and what it's trying to say. So that's kind of my approach. Little plug as well. It's actually, we're selling it to feed people. Each poster that gets sold feeds 15 people, key workers, frontliners, vulnerable women, and those in food poverty. So if you want one, get one. But before all that, the actual real thing. So that's kind of where I stand on design, on what design is or can do or should be doing. And I guess in the kind of classic, you know, design thinking of the, you know, the solution to the problems in the brief, I thought it'd be interesting to pull up the questions that we were asked when we were invited to sort of come and do this talk, and actually kind of interrogate that as a sort of a way through this. So instantly, those sort of things, like innovating in designing culture or reflecting and commenting, I think there's, you know, to be honest, there's kind of a bias already in that question. Everybody wants to innovate. Everybody wants to be original. Everybody, when you're at art college or studying any kind of creative kind of discipline, you all want to be that one that came up with the one thing no one else has. But actually, if you do that in a bubble, if you do that in isolation, not in the isolation we're all fucking in at the minute, but if it's not connected to anywhere, if it has no context, originality fails. It's useless. It's pointless because no one understands it. No one can understand where that comes from. No one can understand how to use it. No one can digest it or connect it or see how useful that originality is going to be. So what's the fucking point? You know, what is the point in that? What is the point in trying to strive to just be original all the time when actually you might just be failing? you need to know the context of your work. So reflecting on, you know, where you are, where your work's going to operate, the audience that it's trying to communicate to, is much more vital than trying to make something new, and should always be the starting point for any kind of creative discipline or endeavor, really. And sort of starting trends or holding a mirror to society. I mean, if you'll indulge me for a second, I couldn't give an absolute flying fuck about making a trend. I mean, you can probably fucking tell, but you know, trends, if that's all you're interested in, you're kind of just chasing someone else's tail. If someone else is an innovator, and we like innovation as designers and creative disciplines and people that break new ground, you can guarantee that their work has a reference or a base or a grounding or a kind of a genesis in something else that we know. That's why it's successful. So just trying to emulate that isn't doing the same thing at all. You're just chasing and chasing, and you're never going to get there. So ultimately, all you're doing is following, and you're conforming, and you're following a trend. And if you're conforming, then you're not being yourself. And if you're not being yourself, then what's the whole point in all of this? And holding up to a mirror to society, well, yeah, of course, I think that's the fundamental role of what we do. We should be asking questions that other people don't ask. We should be trying to solve bigger problems than, you know, design problems and creative problems. We should be challenging society because we're a pretty big part of it. We're a pretty big part of the economy, and everybody, even if they're aware of it or not, comes into contact with a designed object at some point or another, whether it's the Mac that they're using or the computer or the fucking chair that they're sat on or the car that they drive or whatever it is a designed creative object. And we as designers have a responsibility because we put all that stuff out into the world. So if we're not doing it right, all we're doing is fucking adding to the shit. So we need to get better at that. And, you know, it's our role to distract, entertain, or empathise and react. There's the door. As I said, it would go off, Hillary. You know, if it is to distract and entertain, again, it's a bit like the trend thing. That everybody needs a day off. I'm not saying you can't just sort of take some time out, and there's not a role for something that is entertaining or is engaging or that is different from, you know, ultimately, you know, a fucking heavy salad all the time. That's important. But change doesn't come from that. Just because you've changed your journey doesn't mean that you're then suddenly on a different path. That's not change at all. You're only going to get that if you actually engage and challenge and, you know, understand what other people other than yourself are going through or are faced with. So that for me, again, is much more important. I don't necessarily agree with the word react, but I'll get onto that in a sec. So I guess after interrogating that questions, I have some questions for everyone else. And I think it's important that we constantly interrogate our own role in this, and we, you know I haven't got everything worked out at all, and I hope no one else has, because if we have, I think there's something wrong with people that are in a position where they will not move or will not budge from a way of, you know, a way of thinking or an approach or a belief system. You know, you have to be flexible and understanding. So, you know, reaction or response, there's a massive difference. Do you want your work to, you know, to me, reaction, that's something visceral, it's something emotional that you can't control, you will not anticipate. So if your work is reacted to, that's ultimately something that is an unknown. A response is much more engaged. A response is something almost that you might want to happen and design and work that way towards that happening. And therefore you've thought about it more, and you might know what you want the change to be, which is much more important than this kind of fucking firework going off. And, you know, diversion or change, as I said, just because you're on a different road doesn't mean it's, you know, going the right way. And just because it's a distraction and it's new to you doesn't mean it's, you know, it's ultimately a changed thing. The world will still be the same, even if it's new. And active or passive, you know, as was said before, I started chiming in with the Emmerdale accent. You know, we've been far too fucked in this industry for far too long. I've been banging this drum for ages, as have so many other great people, but we've been far too passive as a creative industry when it comes to the issues that we're facing, you know, the issues of race, the issues of gender, the issues of class, that we're just being so passive about. They're in the, you know, they start to sort of get a bit of news, you know, the gender issue was in the news, and then Black Lives Matter, and people, you know, of black communities, of colored communities, of ethnic minority communities, you know, they're surging, but we tend to just sit back and think, well, what can we do? It'll sort itself out, and then we'll do it, of course. We might all believe in it, but you've got to engage. You've got to be active. You have to challenge these things. Otherwise, you're just contributing to the problem. You're adding to it. And I guess the last one, different or better. I think it's really easy to just be different. And I think there's a massive confusion that happens particularly when you're talking about originality, that just because something's different than something else doesn't mean it's original and doesn't mean it's better. So the fact that it's quite easy. You can just, because if you want to be different, you just look at the mainstream, you look at the norm, you look at the behavior, and you just don't do that. But for me, that's a negative. You're choosing the negative option. You're choosing to not engage with something. Whereas if you want something to be better, you might realize that actually it might have to operate within the system. It might have to understand what works and what doesn't work, and find a way through that by bringing in other sources and other kind of diverse inputs into your kind of work as a designer. So for me, is it about, defining? Is it about reflecting? As I said, it's about all of those things kind of at once, but you sort of, as a designer, have a responsibility to understand that and get your head around it.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about beauty. This is something that Eva and Marta, you touched on in your presentation, kind of when there's a role for beauty versus sort of silence. And Craig, you talked about design being an intellectual discipline. Where would you, I think, I'm thinking about our audience here who are predominantly those who are kind of entering the industry for the first time, getting their portfolio in front of people. What do you all look for? Do you look for something that, would you rather see a piece of work that had a strong, powerful message that wasn't executed very well, or a really, really beautiful piece of craft that maybe didn't have as much of a message? Or is there a space for both of those things?
So for me, when I see a portfolio, the last thing I see is a picture of whoever is sending it, or a name or something. I first of all focus on their work. And for me, what I like to see is attention to detail, and that their message is clear, and as well the purpose of this design, because obviously you don't have the same freedom when you design some posters for a social movement than when you have to lay down a leaflet for a path that is just opening an event on Saturday night. So yeah, basically I want to see how they interpret these two ways of designing.
Yeah, but I would say if you want to be a good designer, you cannot have concept without beauty and beauty without concepts. You need to be good with the visual language. That is what graphic design is. But at the same time, it cannot be empty. It needs to have, obviously, this concept. And as Craig said, we never start working by designing. We always start working by thinking first. That's like, it's impossible to make a good design without thinking first and giving the concept or the background to it. I guess when we were speaking more about beauty, it was more how in the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of people try to do beautiful pieces of art or typography or something to support the movement without realizing they were more doing self-promotion than supporting the movement. It was more focused in that sense.
I mean, for me, there's nothing worse than seeing a really bad idea beautifully executed. Because it's just vacuous and kind of shallow and not really telling me anything. When I work with sort of people who are new to the industry, or sort of gaining experience, whatever their age is, doesn't matter. Like you want to see how people sort of react and respond and engage with problems that they're facing, which is usually like a brief or something. You want to see. I'm interested in how people think and how people think differently to me, and how people from different backgrounds and whatever else bring different reference points to the same problem. That for me is what I always look in a portfolio, just like an approach, like how they've got using that one brief. I think the New Blood awards is probably a good example where everyone has the same brief, and look how diverse the responses are to that. That for me is what you want when you sort of engage in a design problem. You want people to sort of find different ways through, and then you judge them on what can be the best thing. So I guess one other thing I want to add is, like, beauty is a relative kind of term. It means different things to different people. But for me, the thing that's important is it's not how great you are on fucking InDesign or whatever else. It's actually like, can you think? And all those other skills that you'll pick up when you get experience. I was told, if you can think, we'll teach you everything else. And that gave me such reassurance as a young sort of designer. So
I agree completely with that, yeah.
That's the most important thing when you look at into work.
And then I wanted to, Craig, you talked about trends a little bit in your presentation, but for those of you who aren't aware, Craig's been doing a graduate showcase on his social channels, kind of highlighting, I'm not sure how many, but an absolute ton of amazing, talented grads on his channels every day. So you must have seen a lot of work coming in over the last few weeks. Eva and Marta, I'm sure you're inundated with getting sent kind of portfolios and work. What are some of the trends that we're seeing in design at the minute, and what can people avoid to stop kind of falling into the pit hole of a sort of trendy book?
I guess for me, it's a difficult one, because I understand like why a lot of trends emerge. I understand that people want to sort of, you know, have a bit of that success when they see something that they engage with or like or whatever. But I have to say, I've been actually quite reassured with a lot of the work that I've seen this year, particularly sort of in my own teaching practices here, there and everywhere, and in the graduate showcase stuff. Is actually it's a bit like music, I guess. It's a bit like when you put a song on from the 70s, or the best songs of the fucking 70s, all the music production kind of sounds similar. You know it's a 70s song, but the songs will last kind of forever if they're good enough. And the music won't change, but the way it's produced will. And I see a lot of that. I've seen a lot of work might look in a similar vein or look kind of aesthetically very similar or whatever, but they might be talking about different things. And I think sometimes when you're looking at work like that at that level, you have to get past that. But I mean, the thing that pisses you off most is kind of things that are really easy to avoid, just like everybody using the same fucking tote bag and everybody using the same billboard mock-up or book cover. And that's, again, I understand that because it's about resource and, you know, Google Images and all these mock-up sites and whatever else. But I would always just say that, again, pay attention to like what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve, and don't just think, right, oh, I've made a brand and I'm just going to slap it on the same things everyone else does. Think about why you might want to do that, and see every application of your design work as an opportunity to sort of show it off a bit more. So,
Eva, Marta, any builds there?
For me, I understand that people follow trends, because especially when you are a student and you are learning what can you do, better learn from what is going on at the moment. But I think that it's important as a designer to keep your originality and to force yourself to it, because it's very easy to fall into the last typeface or the last like way of laying out. But for example, as a studio, when a client comes, we try to offer them something that wasn't offered before, something a bit different, talking about trends and styles. So like a typeface that has not been over exploded or things like this.
And I think a lot of that comes from your inspiration and your kind of reference points, and making sure that you've got a really broad sort of, you know, internal library to pull from. Craig, you do a lot of work that either looks at kind of specific points in history, in politics, or in culture to influence your work. I'm thinking of your sort of mining stuff and your more recent work with rough trade, commenting on films. Eva and Marta, where do you look for your influence and references, or is it a complete case by case all over the place?
I would say it's case by case, right, Marta? Like,
like for example, the typography that we did for Formula One was because we were investigating about typographies that were very trendy, talking about trends, at the beginning of the 20th century in the area of Netherlands, United States, a bit of France. And that's how we recover this trend to bring up a new modern typeface that follows this trend.
Yeah.
Sorry,
when we did Neo 2, the magazine, it's a Spanish magazine of culture, the brief was to do something trendy because they want kind of to rebrand every year. So we kind of try to understand the current trends and then try to find typefaces which were not trendy by then, but they could become. And after we launched it, these typefaces were everywhere, so yeah.
And Craig, have you got any advice on finding inspiration outside of all the kind of normal places, all the kind of standard blogs and the go-to spots?
Well, I think it's exactly that. Don't look at the, you know, the standard blogs and the standard magazines and stuff. They're great. I mean, as a student, I would sort of see that more as a research thing rather than looking for inspiration. You look at the blogs to find out who's doing what kind of work in the industry and see that as I like what they're doing, or I like the cut of their jib, and maybe I'll approach them. But for your work itself, it's the sort of the points of research you should be looking at should be relative to that brief that you're working on. You should look into things that you might not even know about or expect to find inspiration in, is where the meatier, you know, stuff genuinely is, really. Because if, you know, notes coming in, notes going to come out. So yeah.
Yeah, because I think that it depends who you aim to be. For example, in the music industry, do you aim to be like someone that is more calm down, chill, and that not many people knows about you, or do you aim to be the Michael Jackson of the design industry? These things, I think, are what will shape how you think and how you approach design.
Yeah, one thing I want to say is, like, many students don't have practice, so that's what makes them maybe make their work based on trends rather than being innovative, because they don't have the experience and this is what they've seen. They are educating their eye. However, I will say to students who cannot find internships and jobs, I will recommend them to keep doing personal projects to practice, because that's gonna educate their eyes. It's gonna give them confidence to take on projects, and slowly you can build a portfolio. So yeah.
We've only got a few minutes left, so I want to try and get through some audience questions that are coming in. A question from Disha. She is talking about creating sort of work with a social impact or trying to define culture. And she said, how do you do that without budgets, and how do you get the impact you need without, you know, a big kind of client backing you or a big bank balance? Craig, I'm going to turn to you for your experience here.
Yeah, I get no money for anything I do. I mean, I know I'm a bit of a film goon, aren't I? But like, I always looked at the way that like filmmakers work to make amazing things on, you know, almost minimal budgets. And there's a lot of sort of collaboration that has to happen for those things to sort of work and be organised. And for when it comes to sort of social stuff, you've got to have validity. These kinds of things, you might like feel really deeply about something. You might sort of really identify with a cause or a concern, and you want to use your kind of skills or talent to address them. I completely get that. But a lot of the times, if you haven't been through that yourself, or if you're not within a certain community or whatever, it's sometimes hard and suspicious on the receiving end when someone just pops up and just goes, I want to do some work for you. You know, I've had that myself. Where I've identified something and gone, I really want to help, I want to do some design work for you. And they're like, whoa, why do you want to do that? And you've got to sort of really understand the situation and the wider context of what those things are beyond design and beyond creativity before you even think about what a project might do. Again, that idea of, and this is where I sound like a hypocrite, but the idea of, oh, I'll do a poster and raise some money for that. That's not necessarily always the right way to do it at all, because you're thinking about the wrong thing. You're thinking about the smallest issue and trying to contribute to it. There's not wrong with the generosity and the kind of intent there, but if you want to make meaningful change in something, then you have to get that discussion has to be bigger. So it's about investing. It's about being aware of how much time you're going to have to invest in it beyond money, beyond sort of social means, and then engaging with them on a sort of human level before that idea of the designer actually even comes into the conversation. If that makes any sense, I don't know.
That does make a lot of sense. I'm going to move on to an interesting question from Hazel, who says, is research a trap? Is it inevitable to get subconsciously inspired and affected by research, e.g. trends, relevance, popularity, and therefore create somewhat trendy art? And how do you prevent that from happening? Eva and Marta, I'm going to put that question to you guys.
So I don't think it's a trap, because somehow looking at design can train your eye to know what works and what wasn't. But on the other side, on the other hand, if you keep updated and you see that everybody is making teddy bears, for example, in their logos, in their identities and everything, to avoid doing that. So you bring a difference into the design industry.
Yeah, as well, when you're researching, I will shut down the computer and think on concepts. If you're doing a brand, for example, because you're not gonna copy the logo of someone else. You need to create a concept for it. So yeah, sometimes it's good to shut down the research.
Yeah, like it's better to first have the idea and the concept more than jump into designing something just because you saw another brand that has this tweak in the typeface that you like or things like that.
I think it's also just an additional side point. I think it's important to sort of say that the idea of research is actually, I think, tarred by the idea that it's sort of somehow academic and not creative. It actually is a really creative discipline, research, and it's actually really important. And it's because it's not just about looking at what's been done or what people are doing in that market. It's also about experimentation, and research can be drawing endlessly. It could be trying different kinds of, calligraphy, or, that can be research. That is a part of.
But I would say that's more experimentation, isn't it?
But I think that's research. Otherwise, why are you experimenting?
Okay, and then everything you will do is research, because when you are creating the brand and creating a concept will be research as you are drawing a typeface, isn't it?
I see it as the same thing. It's one in the other. It's just the other side of that same object, because it's one informs the other, and the other, it's a sort of endless cycle, because you can't just create in isolation. And research informs your practice, and practice informs your research, because that's how you develop and move things on. And I think it's important to not just say, right, enough research, let's be practical, because I think that gets you in a really tricky situation where the designer can only, do it. It's not. You can actually think, and the subjects and things that you choose to research is creative as well. Being creative about where you might look for those things, and not just looking at what has been done in creative disciplines.
We've got time for one last question, but I'm going to ask this to be a quick one. So this is a question from Maximilian, who says, how do you deal with your work being appreciated as a piece of art, but maybe not getting commissions because it's not seen as potentially adaptable or profitable?
I will say, for example, the example of Jan Mitchell Basquiat, which is not a designer, is an artist. He used to do a lot of graffiti art in New York. Most of you will be familiarized with his work, but nobody was commissioned him for art. So what did he do? He started doing graffitis in front of the best art galleries of New York, and that way he was seen. So it's finding your trick or something, I think.
Yeah, I guess you have to see if you want to do design or art or something that sits in the middle. Just be clear what you want to do, and then put yourself out there. We wanted to do design. We couldn't get any internships or any jobs when we were like students. So we started doing personal projects and eventually publishing them online. And publishing personal projects help us get the visibility we couldn't get by sending our portfolio to studios, for example. And eventually we could start our own thing.
Yeah, like coming, for example, to the first question that Craig answered, we saved an old factory from demolition in our hometown through graphic design. And this project helped us to be more known and recognized in the industry. So sometimes you can use social causes that you believe in, like for us, it's like architecture conservation, and bring it into your discipline.
Yeah, also about kind of collaboration is very important, but as well, self-efficient is important when you don't have the resources. Like maybe you want to do a 3D video and you don't know how to do 3D. There is free tutorials on YouTube on how to do videos on 3D. So you can start learning like that. You can learn how to do typographies by yourself on this project. So yeah, we will tell all of you to kind of push harder to your limits. And if you want to do something, to make it.
Craig, any final words?
Well, I guess as we've got no time, I don't want to wade into the argument of what is art and what is design. But I guess for the sake of this, to give you an answer, if we say art is something that you're not paid for and design something you are in that context, then the only thing I would say to be aware of is to know why you're creating, whichever side you're doing. You just know why you take a project on, whether that's something you want to do yourself and it's something you want to explore or you're interested in, or it's an itch you have to scratch, or if it's a design job where you're doing it, and are you doing it for the money, or is it to learn a new skill or whatever. Just always be aware of why you're practicing what you are, because I think if you confuse one on the other, like you can fall into a trap about what actually makes you happy your work, in your life, and that's not a good place to be.
Amazing. I think my main takeaways from this, and I'm not one of those people who can do clever summaries. I'm going to try. This will probably, I'll run out of steam halfway through. But is to sort of, have an opinion, have a voice, and have a purpose in everything that you do. Don't create stuff just for the sake of creating it. To make sure you've got you're like looking broadly for inspiration and research, and that you're experimenting widely, not just kind of jumping into making, and to think a lot before you start doing anything at all. Thinking is as big a part of the process as the craft. I hope I've done that justice in that. I tried. Thank you, Craig, Eva, Marta, so much for your time today.